There's a common narrative about AI that I want to dispel, in part because it's based mostly on fear, but more importantly, because I think it misses the most interesting thing that's going on with AI right now. You see, there's a worry that seems to be that if we offload everything to the machine, right, both our thinking and our doing, that what we get back is going to be a hollow imitation of what we used to make. And I guess we could call this the lazy AI future. And there is some truth to this vision, right? There is going to be a great deal of work made by people who have abdicated both halves of their job to the agent. And very little of it is going to be memorable or worth much. But the more interesting situation is the one where you keep the thinking and hand off only the doing. And that, I think, is where the actual change to how creative work gets done is hiding. Hi, I'm Chris Butler. I'm the Chief Design Officer here at Newfangled. And I've spent a lot of time working with AI in a variety of contexts. And that sentence alone is sort of a summary of where I've landed, which is with AI, working with AI as opposed to watching AI work. It's such an important difference because here's what happens when you keep the thinking. First, you have to describe what you want to the agent, to the machine, and you have to describe it with enough precision that what comes back is actually what you wanted, which is actually not how we usually work with our fellow human beings. Right? When you're working with a competent colleague, they fill in a lot of our competence gaps with their own. Right? Their intelligence doesn't require any elicitation, but the machine's does. And at first, this can feel like a really frustrating blocker. You have to say what you mean with a ton of precision. And if you can't, then what you get back will not only be not what you wanted, but it will be far less than. But in a sense, I think that this is a gift because the act of describing what you want with enough precision that the agent can deliver it, it produces a sharper version of what you wanted in the first place, right? Because we all tend to begin knowing roughly what it is we want. It's like a sketch in our head. And then we articulate it, and the articulation of it makes the thing clearer. And then we revise, and then the revision sharpens it even further, and then we iterate. And I think in this process, what you discover, the longer you do this, is that that description is where the idea often gets made. The act of description. It's a form of thinking out loud that becomes building. And this is also, I think, why people find it so easy to dismiss AI after just trying it once for an afternoon, right? Because the best output comes after iteration. And iteration requires patience. And we have been taught anything but, right? We're taught to expect instant gratification. In fact, there's a reason why when Claude pushes Claude Design every time you log in, why it starts with a fork in the road, right? You can either make something or you can connect it to your design system. And it's because they know that if you just start making something, you're going to find that it doesn't measure up to what your design team can do on their own. And you'll burn all of your tokens along with it. In other words, even Anthropic knows that instant AI is less than iterative AI, right? But we've also become used to thinking out loud with colleagues whose intelligence shapes itself around our half-formed words, right? Working with a machine is totally different than that. It requires you to clarify before you can collaborate. And that is much harder, I think, than it sounds. But once you get into the rhythm of it, something interesting does happen because the thing improves and the thought improves and the work you're doing becomes work you just could not have done before. Not because the machine made it for you, that helps, but because describing it precisely required you to think it through in a different way and more carefully than you would have before. And this is not a new pattern at all, by the way, right? When desktop publishing collapsed the work of a printing house into commands that like one person could run in their office, it made layout generation faster, right? I'm using the word generation probably improperly, but more interestingly, it changed layout, right? It changed editorial design. It changed the relationship between text and image and between hierarchy and white space. It changed how we read. And so the tools that take over part of the work also remake the work that remains, which I think is really interesting. And it's always been true. So here's the working principle that I've come to now as a designer. And it's this: every technological advance should be measured not by the intellectual property it absorbs, in other words, how much work it can do without us, but by how much intellectual investment is worth sowing in it. How much of our thinking do we put in? The fear narrative, I think, is right that the lazy version of AI will produce a great deal of forgettable work and worthless work. And there's plenty of that already. We don't need more. And we've all seen it. But the fear narrative also constructs a straw man of what AI is for. Because the more we think of it as a replacement, the more we'll find its delivery wanting and replaceable. But the more we think of it as a tool, right, as something we use to extend our thinking and our doing, the more we'll surprise ourselves by what we make with it. So keep the thinking, right? Hand off the doing. That's where the interesting work is right now. But other than that, I'd love to hear what you think, right? What are you making now? And more importantly, what are you making differently now that you've got some new tools at your disposal? You can find me on LinkedIn. Perhaps you're watching this on LinkedIn. You can find me through this website, or you can just email me directly at chris@newfangled.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.